Good morning, everyone. July 1st, holiday weekend coming up. How is the severe weather going to shape up? The overall good news is that the pattern is in favor of calmer weather, not necessarily free of thunderstorms, but free of severe thunderstorms. Let's start out a little different this morning and talk about the EPS mean 500 millibar flow for the next 7 days, basically. Technically, it starts last night, but this is valuable because it gives you a general pattern overview. So the one thing you'll notice is this actually is one of those hot air domes that develops in the summer very typically, and that pretty much suppresses organized severe weather. You'll get some air mass pop-up thunderstorms in that, and with those you might get a wind gust or two, but generally everything in this zone here is just not really going to be very conducive to severe weather. This flow, this is kind of out of the west-northwest to the east-southeast, can support widely scattered severe weather episodes here. And when we get closer to the fine scale details of what happens here later in the week, there might be a little wave or something in here that enhances that flow. But generally speaking, everything behind here is cooler and more stable. And if we take a look at the same period and look at the anomaly of what the dew points are looking like, it looks still pretty moist in Mexico, West Texas, and parts of New Mexico, and even getting into the Great Plains a little bit. So this just kind of tells you where fuel for severe weather could be, but of course the wind shear is not there. So again, the air will be unstable, which is typical of summer, but nothing to really get it to go. This is also a good indicator of where heavy downpours might be. Another thing we might look at, and I don't have it prepared this morning, would be precipitable water. It's just the amount of water in a column of air. If you were to take every ounce of humidity out and just convert it to water and put it in a rain gauge, that's what, a theoretical value instantaneously. So anyway, that's the overall pattern, and it is looking a lot like summer. And then the next 7-day review we'll do is NIU's supercell composite outlook. And it does shift that severe weather, as I said, up to the north. And look how void the probabilities are down here where that high pressure ridge is developing. Virtually no chance of supercell activities. And just as a reminder, a supercell is basically a thunderstorm that's capable of producing any of the severe weather threats that we're concerned with: large hail, damaging winds, or a tornado. And for that to happen, you have to have unstable air and a good jet stream flow, because a supercell is, by its definition, is rotating and is also sustainable, meaning it lasts long enough to actually produce large hail or tornadoes, for example. Let's go back and take a look at the current view here this morning. It is easy to see where the nation has been carved out with cooler, more stable air. This is a big relief, especially the northern plains. They've gotten hammered with derechos and tornadoes and just other large-scale wind and hail events, so it's a calm, kind of a breath of relief up there. Meanwhile, the main frontal band of any concern is certainly this right here, and in particular this part of it. But let's get to the outlooks here and take a look at that. We do have a slight risk of severe weather. That's the 2 out of 5 category. Our nation's capital, New York City, included in that, and much of northern Virginia, with generally kind of a stretched out, broader 1 pattern. Just kind of going up from Maine all the way down to Mississippi. And then we do have, this is new this morning, a little pop-up upslope, kind of a high plains event there in Nebraska and parts of South Dakota. Again, 2 out of 5 risk there. Now, the good news is that the tornado frequency on Nadocast and also from the SPC is not even showing up on the radar, no pun intended. Now, if you look at CSU's model, it does kind of put a smattering of slight tornado risk up there in New England, so that's been consistent. I'd watch that. It does show that high plains activity there, and then the upper right-hand panel here is hail. And the high wind probabilities are at their highest from the nation's capital through Maryland, maybe into parts of Delaware. And that's from what we'll show you here, these developing thunderstorms. So here's the HRRR simulated radar, and it shows these thunderstorms advancing across Virginia into that slight risk area and into that high wind risk area there. So it's assuming that either a squall line will develop or that individual cells will collapse and produce some pretty good downpours. And notice there are some storms in New England here, and that's where that slight tornado probability was indicated. So it's a possibility. They're closer to what I would say would be the low-level possibilities for severe weather, meaning that tornadoes are very dependent on low-level winds. and those are probably going to be at their best up there. If we go through the next couple of days, like I said at the top of the video, things calming down a little bit. No slight risks showing up. That's the yellow. But a couple of broad-scale, low marginal risk areas, Minnesota, Iowa, Great Lakes, also up through Montana and Idaho. Very typical for this pattern. CSU is showing practically no tornado probabilities. I don't see any except for one little patch in Mexico. That's a little weird. But the hail probabilities are certainly up in Minnesota, Wisconsin, those areas, and just a smattering of wind probabilities. So overall, kind of a calming down a little bit. And then we go on to Thursday, and this pattern just marches a little bit. So we got a level 1 up in New England and parts of New York and Pennsylvania, and back into the North Dakota, South Dakota realm again. But it is a pretty weak chance. On Thursday, that same outlook has a tiny little tornado risk there just off to the east of La Crosse, Wisconsin. Otherwise, nothing really. And the highest probabilities of either hail or wind are up in the New England area. So of the two areas, that seems to be maybe a little more favored. And as we go out now in advance, the SPC is quiet on all these, probably rightly so, because I don't really see a lot of probabilities showing up. Now on Friday, again, the northern parts of the Great Lakes, maybe a slightly elevated risk. By the way, let me go back to that. So SPC would be targeting a 15% risk. So it's just a question right now of whether they believe this. Otherwise, they would put an area right there. And then on Saturday, no 15% risks at all. And of course, silent on SPC. Sunday, and you can kind of see another front kind of drooping down with that. Remember, that flow is kind of out of the west-northwest to the east-southeast. So that implies that fronts will come down, but they won't drive. They'll kind of sink into the Great Plains and stretch out a little bit. Same here. So the frontal boundary is roughly in that area. We'll take a look at the final two NIU probabilities. I put the first week up at the top, just kind of correlated with everything. But on the week of July 8th through the 14th, the supercell index quiets down quite a bit. Not as high of probabilities, but over the same areas basically. And then finally rounding this out, July 15th through July 21st. This has been pretty consistent. The supercells are back. Kansas, all the way up to Montana, parts of Iowa, certainly Nebraska. So that's something worthy of watching. There could be something in the pattern there that is holding together enough to make that rather valid. And of course, I'll be keeping an eye on that probability middle to the late part of July. Thanks for watching today's edition of Severe Thunderstorm Outlooks. This is published every day after the morning Storm Prediction Center update. Also, remember to check that site off on day one because they update it fairly frequently. If you like this video, please like it. Also, you can subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.